yourself.
Well, welcome here this evening to this talk where we are, it is our privilege to have Dr. Ron Neller with us from Ministries International, and it's a real pleasure to host this talk and to have the opportunity to do so. I haven't hosted, we as a congregation haven't hosted a talk like this in the 7 years I've been here, but we did have a similar event when I was in Scotland more than 7 years ago, and people found it very helpful, so I hope that you do find the talk tonight useful and edifying. Afterwards, there'll be a cup of tea and some things to eat. Please stay around, and also there is a bookstall with various resources, and Ron will explain whatever deals or things he has for you afterwards. So I'm not going to say too much about Dr. Neller. I have a little blurb here that was part of the public announcement. Ron has travelled the world studying how flowing water shapes landscapes. He's presented over 35 research papers at international conferences. He has run his own research institute. He has decades of research that contradicted naturalism's, quote, slow and gradual processes but matched the Bible's description of a global flood. And this helped bring Ron to Christ in his early 50s. And he now works as a researcher, writer and speaker for Ministries International. I'm not going to say any more. Maybe I said too much because Ron's going to tell us his personal story. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody, and welcome here. Because you haven't heard a CMI speaker for 7 years, I mean, I could get into some really detailed topics that you might want to hear about, but we thought tonight we'd share with you a journey of how a scientist who did not want to become a Christian for most of his life, fought hard not to be a Christian, eventually gave his life to Christ, and it was because of the very science that I was studying and researching around the world that brought me to Christ, which is rather interesting because the media stipulate that scientists cannot give their lives to Christ because they're meant to be rational and all the rest. I'm going to highlight to you part of that journey and have a little bit of fun with this. Parts of this are quite amusing, other parts are not, but it's a personal journey that I'm going to show you, given the fact it's a general night and a topic. I'll talk a little bit about landscapes and show you some beautiful landscapes, but I'll also touch on fossils for you as well and how they're formed and so on. And so I thought I'd just mix a bit of those topics together just to give you a general overview of the sort of research that I was doing and so on. So that's what we'll do tonight, a bit of a personal journey, a humorous one at times, and particularly the fact that it's overwhelming now that science is pointing towards certainly a global flood and certainly to many other aspects of the Bible as well. So again, thank you John and Mary for bringing me here. It's been a great pleasure to be welcomed at your home and to feel at home as well, which really is excellent for us because we are a charity. We don't seek funds, we simply survive on donations, and having people like this look after you and feed you and all the rest of accommodate you is just a real blessing for us. Keeps our costs down, keeps us able to be on the move. So before we start, if I may pray, just Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together, Lord, as brothers and sisters in Christ, to share this journey, Lord, and to particularly highlight that the Bible is one entity. Whilst there is an Old Testament, New Testament, whilst there are many books, it is all one woven tapestry. And hopefully that can be highlighted today. The book of Genesis is historical, foundational, truthful, and very much forms the foundation to the rest of the Bible. So we praise you, Lord, and thank you, Lord, that you brought us here safely. In Christ's wonderful name, we pray to you. Amen.
Amen.
So, we call it Evolutionist to Creationist because that's my journey. From being an evolutionist, teaching worldwide, became professor in 3 different continents, and teaching worldwide all about evolution from a landscape point of view. So I now work for Creation Ministries International, as you heard, as a speaker, writer and editor. I'm also a board director of Australian Christian Tertiary Education, which has only just gone public. We are establishing, been given approval to establish a full Christian university in Australia, non-denominational, and so on the board already, Presbyterians, Baptists, Brethren, and so on, and many of them are professors from engineering, education, and so on. So we're putting together a full university, not a Bible college, but there will certainly be biblical elements all through that. And so if anybody wants any information on that matter, I'm happy to give you some of the brochures that have just been released and so on to give you an update of where we're at. But tonight it's about Evolutionist to Creationist. It's my journey and my wife's journey as well, rather interesting, and how we came to Christ. And so I better turn this on. Whilst I'm a scientist, I'm not an IT or user of these, very good. I studied landscapes, floods. I was particularly interested in floods and how they create the current landscape, because we are taught that the current floods over hundreds, thousands, millions of years have created these landscapes. I particularly focused on sediments, and that's the biggest word you're going to hear. If I throw in other words, I don't expect you to understand them. I'm just doing it to impress you that I'm a scientist. Sediments is the one word. It simply means dirt on the move. So when dirt gets washed off a property and heads off towards the river channels and drainage systems, we call that sediment. But I also did research in fossils, and about halfway through my life, I had a midlife crisis and became a microbiologist of all people, and published 6 international papers in microbiology. Isn't that weird? How a person who's outside chasing the world suddenly becomes a microbiologist for a short period of time. Then I woke up again and realised I shouldn't be a microbiologist. I should be a landscape geomorphologist type character. I studied around the world, researched around the world. I lived in China for 10 years, researching there, and particularly southern China, and learned to speak Cantonese. I lived in Finland for a number of years, looking at Arctic landscapes as well, and learned to speak Finnish in there. I worked for the Libyan government, by the way, the Gaddafi government, but I know you're going to look at me like that, but that's not what I did. I was not one of the bad guys. I was the person, one of the people looking at sustainability, water supply, and so on, which did have an impact on me, by the way. That research had an impact on bringing me to Christ. Because Libya was very much misinterpreted. What Gaddafi was on about was African issues, not Muslim issues. And so there were Jewish synagogues, there were Christian churches in Tripoli when I was there, active. So it was very much misunderstood, as our media often does, unfortunately. I worked in Peru, in the Amazon, working on the Amazon River, the Huallaga River, and that was exciting, very much exciting. I enjoyed swimming in the Amazon River, and you're looking at me strange again. What are you thinking?
Piranhas.
Piranhas, yes. You've watched too much television. The piranhas in the Amazon do not eat you.
Oh.
It's the piranhas in the Congo that eat you. That was Jacques Cousteau who tried to convince us that he needed more money, and so he created a myth story and a documentary about the Amazonian piranhas. So you can swim in the water, you can look underwater, you can see the piranhas swimming around. They didn't eat me, I ate them with a Peruvian sauce. Beautiful, just beautiful. And so I love doing all of that. Pacific Islands, worked throughout the Pacific Islands, particularly the Cook Islands as well, loved all of that. South Africa, working in Kruger National Park and other places, loved all of that as well. And of course worked in Australia, but many other countries as well did I do research in. So I was roaming the planet. Now why did I adopt that particular lifestyle? Roaming the world, always on the move, working between university to university and shifting universities all around. Here's the sad bit, raised in a dysfunctional home with alcoholism and a lot of violence, and non-Christian by the way. And so what happened, the good end of that story is that my father asked to be forgiven much later. When I reached into my 50s, he asked to be forgiven for what had happened, because he thought that's the way you raised children. And so what I did was I simply took off. Having been raised that way, I took off. I won't go into something else that happened at school, let's just say another form of abuse, but the point being there, when you have people saying they love you and treat you like that, particularly male figures, the last thing you're going to listen to is a Christian coming up to you and saying there's a Father who loves you. You're not going to listen to it. You're going to leave it and ignore it. And so what happened was I took off around the world. What was I trying to do? Well, I was trying to do what young people today are very much trying to do. Who am I? What is my identity? What is my purpose? Why am I here? That's why when I went to China and Finland, I didn't go as an expatriate. I went as a local. So in China, I accepted local salary. Well, the Chinese were amazed by that. And so they gave me incredible resources because they said Westerners normally come on that expatriate salary. And I did not do that. Why? I was trying to find out who I am. And what, so I was trying to embed myself in other cultures. When I should have been pointed, they should have pointed me in the direction of God, but that was not happening because I put up a barrier that I resisted for 35 years of research around the world until the science that I had studied pointed so strongly towards the Bible, to a global flood, that I, in the end, found myself between a rock and a hard place and had to actually give my life. You'll find that journey, and I'll tell it later, a little bit funny. It's quite an interesting one, how atheistic who become an agnostic by then came to Christ. I'll share that later. But that was my journey around the world. Professor, consultant in many countries, worked for the OECD, worked as an advisor. In the end, when I came back to Australia, as a federal government advisor and state government advisor on national heritage and world heritage sites and so on. Loved all of that. Roamed the world, thoroughly enjoyed it. But I saw patterns. Most academics from a university will look at their local environment, interpret it from their local situation and their local knowledge, and that's all good. But when you see patterns and you find the same feature in 9 locations, and each of those features, whilst they're identical, has 9 different interpretations because you had 9 different academics studying them, each with their own interpretation, you begin to realise, no, there are patterns. There is another explanation. And so I thought that helped me come to Christ in the end. Now that I'm working with Creation Ministries, we are very much wanting to be in churches, youth groups, schools, all of those sorts of things. And we really centre this on 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to make a defence to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And that's very important. When I first became a Christian, I had very much a cleric personality, and I didn't do it with gentleness and respect. And I quickly learnt this scripture is very, very important. But that's what Creation Ministries stands upon. We wish to help Christians understand what is not being revealed in classic academic literature, which is actually suppressed in literature as well. And I'll give you examples of that later if you like, because I had to change my papers at times to suit the journals because there was a ramification or an implication that was something biblical that I never intended it to be. But I had to change the papers or it would not be published. So this is the sort of world we live in today, unfortunately. And just to let you know a bit more about creation.com before I get into the message. Look, we have a website, creation.com. Anybody been to the website? Yeah, excellent. Over 15,000 articles now written for you. Not for academics, written for you. And that's an incredible site. So don't type in the word flood. You'll get 2,000 papers. Type in flood, when, how, why, all those sorts of questions and so on. So we have that. We've also gone into the social media. We started that about 18 to 20 months ago, and this has really revolutionised the way we connect with young people especially. And they love it. And we found it's opened doors for us around the globe. So I've just come back from speaking across Ireland and the UK, Malaysia, Singapore. Pastors everywhere are finding out about what we're doing and the incredible science behind it all, and the top scientists worldwide who are now very much on the team. And so we're on YouTube, Facebook, everything. So if you might listen to me today, but your point is you can go and listen to an astrophysicist, you can go and listen to a biologist, all online now. And it's all free of charge. And we also have these info bites. Now the info bites are a newsletter that comes out every fortnight or so, and it gives you some simple stuff that's just been discovered in science, which is written for you. It's not written for the academics. And I must admit, when I first joined Creation Ministries, I found it very difficult to write for the public. My first paper, I can publish any journal, except the first time. But my first paper to the Creation Ministries was rejected 4 times because I had to make sure it was understood by the public, had to make sure it was scripturally correct and everything else. This comes out about every fortnight. It's completely free of charge. This is the info bites, and what happens here, we can circulate around the room for you. Just to get out of the way, it's administration. If anybody wants that, it talks about some, it's not just science, it's about, there's theology, there's government statements, there's movies, Jurassic Park. What does Jurassic Park mean? We'll tell you in a very short 1-page, 2-page little article that you'll love. And so sign up for there, and if you decide you don't like it after a couple of months, what are you going to do?
Unsubscribe.
Unsubscribe. Do you think I'm coming back to War Hope to talk to you about this? No, I'm not. You're out of our system, you're gone entirely. But this is a great way of keeping up to date, particularly with topical issues that the public are now on about, or that the media is on about. So if NASA says they found Kepler-2 again, we'll tell you very quickly, because we have scientists at NASA actually writing for us who say Kepler-2 is not like Earth, it is too close to its star, it is on fire, it is burning with volcanoes, but NASA didn't tell you that. We will through the info bite. And that's a simple 1 or 2 pager and so on. And you get other resources as well, it's all free for you. So I thought I'd get the admin out of the site out of the way first of all, and let's move on. So I took off around the world, looking at sediments, landscapes, fossils. Some of it, because in kindergarten and primary when I was little, we still had some scriptural training. And so some of it, thin arrows, pointed to the Bible, but the majority of it pointed to evolution. Did I study evolution? No. So why did I accept it? Because it's the paradigm. It's what every academic talks about. And you're told to accept that. Although I was taught by one academic not to accept the current paradigm, always challenge them. And I took that with me through life and challenged the existing paradigms. These ways of thinking, these paradigms are ways of thinking. And so I was teaching this for 35 years, all this model. Let's have a look at some of the things I noticed as I travel the world. And these might seem simple, but when you put them all together, they create a very clear picture. First of all, this is a sedimentary planet. Sedimentary rocks, sediment, soils being washed away. 16 kilometres deep. We don't see that on the other planets. It's this planet that has it. You get a little bit of dust blowing around Mars and all the rest of it. We are a sedimentary planet. In other words, we have an incredible water movement over this planet. Not only that, 40% of the planet is made up of plateaus. Highly elevated, these are plateaus. Let's see if it's not going to work on that screen. It works down there, doesn't work there. Anyhow, nice flat surfaces that may be eroded on one side, but generally going back. Great Dividing Range is one of those, up here on the east coast, and then gradually going back inland. 40% of the planet is plateaus, and I asked the question, how come we have plateaus everywhere? In fact, in Africa, it's 60% of the continent is plateaus. How do you have these beautiful surfaces that are meant to be 300, 500 million years old? Why haven't they got lots of valleys, carvings, all sorts of things? How come the planet is riddled with plateaus? In fact, you can fly across China, and for an hour you can just watch a plateau. It's unbelievable. So we're at plateaus. Now, I was taught that this upper layer was resistant to erosion. Rainfall couldn't wash it away, it was resistant. Well, let's look at a plateau closer to home, Wallamombi Falls, the Great Dividing Range. The sedimentary layers do not go horizontally, they go up like that. And that waterfalls is not following down the weak rock. In other words, we have a beautiful plateau, and all the soft rocks are still there, just like the hard rocks, which is unusual. So the argument we have plateaus because of hard rock on the top is completely gone now. We have found many plateaus where the rocks are actually tilted upward or something like that. So we've got a problem with that. We also have a problem with these layers, these sedimentary layers. You can see them all there like there. I've highlighted it there. sedimentary beds down at Port Arthur, lovely, lovely layers. Well, they're all nice and smooth. And you do see them in floodplains and places like that. But these will go on for hundreds or thousands of kilometres. Absolutely beautiful. When you would expect there'd be all sorts of erosion, because they argue that each of these layers was put down by a separate flood. A flood put down this layer, then another flood put down this layer, another flood put down that layer. And there's a problem with that, a real big problem. Because here's a layer between shale down here and sandstone in the USA, beautiful smooth surface between the two. And we are then told they were not put down one after the other. There's a 12 million year gap between the two. Here's the problem. I said to my colleagues, are you telling me that for 12 million years it never rained, there was no wind erosion, there was no gullying, no landslip? This doesn't just go for a kilometre or so, this goes for hundreds of kilometres. And if you want a more dramatic example, let's go to the Grand Canyon. 10 million years difference, 20 million years difference. This goes on for thousands of square kilometres of perfectly layered. In other words, for that 20 million years, it didn't rain, there was no wind, there was no erosion, there was no ice. I'm getting something wrong here. These layers should not be so uniform in these plateaus around the planet. It should not be. Let's explore that deeper. The reason they should not be is because, here's a big word for you, bioturbation. It simply means organic material. The moment we put a floodplain down, like you have here, you've got floodplains, what happens? The root material grows in and disrupts that layer, the surface of that layer. Or even on a sand beach, creatures will begin to wander, stirring it up, and it's all stirred up like that. Here's a problem. We don't see in any of those layers evidence of root material, evidence of biological activity. In other words, I then said, so what you're telling me is for that 10 million years or 20 million years or 12 million years, not only was there no rain, no wind, no surface erosion, no gully erosion, there was also no biological activity. Because we cannot trace bioturbation in any of those layers. In other words, I started to come to a conclusion, those layers were not put down slowly, because the one thing about these bottom sediments, if I've got it next, let's have a look now, go back, that disturbance happens within hours, not years. Within hours and days, you've lost your surface uniformity. So how can we see it all around the planet, everywhere we go? And so, and I'm not giving you all the information on these landscapes, I want to move on to the fossils. Here's another one that's great. Another big word for you, polystrate fossils, simply means a tree trunk stuck in the rock. Have you seen that? Some of you have. Yes. And that's a tree trunk. The fascinating thing about a tree trunk, it's fossilised, is it has no roots. If the tree was fossilised, why aren't the large roots, the main roots fossilised? Why aren't they there? Where's the branches? There's no branches, no leaves. And if you think that's rare, it's not rare. From Bow Desert in southern Queensland up to Gympie, there are millions of these underground. Millions. If you go to a coal mine, you will find them everywhere. And they're all standing upright like this. Now so what they argue then is that the tree was growing. This sediment, which became sedimentary rock, was put there in position. And then years later, more sedimentary rock and more sedimentary rock and so on. There's a big problem with that because often the rock up here might be 100,000 years or 500,000 years older or younger than the rock down here. So how does a tree trunk stand there for 100,000 years or 500,000 years and not completely decay? It indicates that it had to be buried rapidly. But how? We stumbled over this for years. But then Mount St. Helens happened. And when that happened, massive explosion, snapped thousands, tens of thousands of trees off at ground level. Snapped them off. No roots. Burnt the top, snapped them off as well. All the trunks then went downstream and occupied a lake like a log mat all over the lake. Thousands of them. Before sinking to the bottom, guess what they did? They turned upright, yes. And they went down and embedded themselves into the shallow sediments at the bottom of the lake. Interesting. So it indicates a catastrophe, but guess what's happening? They're not fossilising, because Mount St. Helens hasn't supplied a lot of sediment. And because it hasn't supplied a lot of sediment, the top parts still sitting in the water are all decomposing. And scientists have monitored that for years now. They are not becoming polystrate fossils. We know how they were placed there, but we are missing the sediment. In other words, the sediment all had to come at once. So Mount St. Helens got to it, and whatever it did in the past had to be massive and actually had to be worldwide, because polystrate fossils are found everywhere. I could talk to you about a lot of other things too. Plateaus, for example, will have beautifully rounded cobbles, just like you see in a river channel, called bedload. Beautiful round cobbles that will jump across the river system. The Wyoming Plateau alone has 1 billion of them on top. In South Africa, I saw another one, there's a plateau again with 1 billion of these beautifully rounded bedload from flowing water on top of the plateau. How? And that we know in Wyoming, that particular rock came from 500 kilometres away. And we know that by today's calculations of hydraulics, velocity and all the rest, that cannot be done by any conditions today. It was a catastrophe of unknown scale. So the more I study all of these different things, water gaps, for example, that's when a river flows through a mountain range with absolute content. Doesn't care about the mountain range, just carves its own way through. We are completely at a loss about that, yet all across Australia, they are everywhere. Then we found that in France, 50% of all the valleys are water gap valleys, where the river absolutely doesn't flow around obstacles, it flows through them. In other words, something else happened of a catastrophic nature. I can give you so many examples. We can talk about it in the Q&A session afterwards. But let's move on to fossil formation, because it's also linked to this sediment, this dirt on the move. And in this case, just a bit of background here, fossil formation, what does it require? I'm giving you a happy fish, by the way, because all fossils should be happy because they get a new name and a new interpretation. If I found it, I'm calling it Veronicus nullicioritis. You could do the same. You have to go home tonight and think, what would you call your fossil if you found a new fossil? Give it your own name. But the point is, to create a fossil, having looked at the trillions and trillions of fossils worldwide, we know they must be buried rapidly in sediment, and they must be lots of sediment to create compaction. Squeeze them. They have to be squeezed. And we look at that sort of river and we say, oh, that's lots of sediment. It's not actually. One of the things we are misled is to think these are lots of sediments. These sediments tend to get spread out over a large area. They might have an ecological impact, of course, and I've looked at them in many studies. But in terms of creating a fossil, that's not enough sediment. The sediment must not be millimetres or centimetres deep. It has to be metres, tens of metres, to create a fossil. And I'll explain all of that. And so the fascinating thing there, by the way, is that the fossils are found 99.9% basically are found in flood sediment. Now we have wind sediment. When the wind blows, it creates a sediment. When the ocean comes in, it creates a beach. That's a beach sediment. We have wind sediment, we have flood sediment. They are all different. You could give me a sample and not tell me where it's from. I'll look at its kurtosis, skewness, all sorts of things. I will tell you where it's from. The fascinating thing about fossils is they're not buried in landslide sediments, as is often argued. It's not buried in meteoritic sediments. They're buried in flood sediments. And that's been a big discovery as well over the years. So we come back to this sediment. This is where I was an expert in roaming the world, looking at this as well. We need rapid burial and continued burial, and I'll show you why as we do this. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is after we have done 50 to 70 years research around the world, we know we need rapid and deep sedimentation. Nowhere on the planet do we get enough. Nowhere is there being a fossil created today. Even the paleontologists will state that. There is no fossil being created today. Something's wrong there, isn't there? Because the evolutionary argument says that we start at the beginning of time, fossils are created, and then more fossils are created at this period of time, and more fossils here, and more fossils, and we put that together as millions of years of evolution. But for some reason today, with human impact being the biggest ever, no fossils are being created. They've explored even the ocean floors, taken samples. We can't find fossils being created today. What has stopped it? Well, we do not observe rapid and deep sedimentation. We think we do. We think we see it. And this is where you've got to be careful as a scientist. What you think you see and what is can be two different things. And this is where I got a lovely little contract with the Cook Island government. They said, you're an expert, come overseas. This is Takatuma Lagoon in Rarotonga. The corals that you can see up there towards the island must be being damaged by the sediment. And you've probably heard of that in Australia before, in the Great Barrier Reef. When a person similar to myself said, no, they're not. And what happened to him?
Fired.
He was terminated, went to court, appealed. The court said he's correct. He needs to be reappointed. What did the university do when he was reappointed? Terminated him again. Why? Because that university won more research money to explore how the fossils were, how the coral reef was being damaged by the sediment, which was now proven to be incorrect. It was a loss of money. Major money. In this case, I was called to do the same thing in Takatuma. They said this is going to damage the tourism because it's their corals that are important. I looked at that, and being non-Christian, I must admit, they said, come over here for a week. I said, no, I'll need more than a week. Swimming in Takatuma Lagoon, I'll need 2 weeks. It'll be fun. I solved it in one day. It looks like a lot of sediment. It's not. It's the colour of the sediment, not the volume. It's a clay, red clay. So what is happening is it was going out, settling on the coral. The very next high tide washed it off and flushed it out. No problem whatsoever to the coral. But I realised it was a visual problem, so I suggested something simple like hay bales. Rather than all this high-powered technology, just put in hay bales and it solved the problem. Now, I didn't get sacked like in the James Cook University. Now, the New Zealand government got upset because they were trying to sell the Cook Islands all these sediment control measures. And I told them, no, just go and create some hay bales. And so the New Zealand government got upset. The Cook Island government loved me and kept inviting me back to solve other problems as well. But I love that. And by the way, as I travel the world, I did go to churches every now and then. And again, for the wrong reason. Because I was trying to climb the ladder. I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be the professor. So what did I do? If my existing professor was a Christian, what did I do? Praise the Lord. I went to church. When I was in the Cook Islands, it was so amazing. You'll love this one. I had so many incidents that were just so funny. I was there in the Cook Islands, I'm meeting all the ministers, and they said, Ron, before we talk about this contract and this, let's all pray. And I went, what? You might pray what? So I lowered my head and I thought, I'm supposed to mumble or something. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I just. But after the meeting, I then said to each of the ministers, I said, so what do you do? She said, I'm a minister for marine science and I'm the pastor of this church. And you? I'm the minister for agriculture and I'm the pastor of this church. And I thought, well, if you're all pastors, I better go to a church. Otherwise, I may not get this contract. So I went to a beautiful church, beautiful white building. And the Pacific Islanders, they can sing. They can sing. And I loved it, the music, but I felt tense. And then all of a sudden, a Cook Islander gentleman reached across from behind me, grabbed me by the shoulders, began to massage me, and in a Cook Islander accent said, hey bro, just chill, relax bro, okay? Just chill. I turned, fist clenched, I'm going to take him out, and I looked up, and he was a rugby player. I went, okay, I'll chill. And he invited me then to the lunch afterwards, and so, again, I was being exposed to Christ through the most amazing ways as I travelled the world. And the travelling, by the way, I did enjoy, even though I was, on the record, shot at, arrested by foreign governments, had to jump from a moving vehicle and attempted kidnapping of a Finnish chap and myself. We were drugged and robbed in China. All these things, but I loved it because what was happening was these challenges were helping me grow, to have confidence in myself. Sounds weird, but young people today are in the same situation where their schooling and so on is not quite giving them, the lack of Christian education these days is not giving them an identity, and they're seeking it desperately. And as I was, as a unique case, I guess, many years ago. But I loved all this research, but I kept coming across Christians, and that was all exciting. And so, good stuff there. But now let's get down to the reality. How much sediment is being deposited around the world today? Well, we have mapped everything and monitored everything. I'm not talking about my studies, I'm talking about hundreds, if not thousands of studies which we've collated, put together. There's the map of the ocean floor. 99% of all fossils, by the way, are marine. So the place I'm expecting to find sediment is marine environment. 99% of all fossils are marine. Here we are. We've put traps even off the Great Barrier Reef. We've put sediment traps on the bottom. And in one talk I was doing, one lady just said, "Oh, can I just say something?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm a person who monitors the sediment off the Great Barrier Reef. We find nothing. We don't measure anything over 20 years, 30 years. What do we find here? All the studies have been put together, and around the world, the deepest rate of sedimentation, and we have to extrapolate this, is 5 centimetres in 1,000 years. Don't you get excited about that? 5 centimetres in the red spots. Woo! I can't fossilise a cockroach at 5 centimetres in 1,000 years. Because there it is, up there on the side, 5 centimetres. So in other words, 0.05 centimetres per year. That is not good. No, it's less than that actually. I've done my calculations wrong there. 5 centimetres, 1,000 years, yeah, or whatever. Yeah, you'll work it out. Take it home, ponder it tonight, and come back with your answer tomorrow, okay? So, anyhow, that hit me like a brick. So I began exploring, well, what is the rest of the world doing in other environments? My friend said, come closer to shore, Ron. Let's look at the continental shelves. So this is a false image from a Landsat satellite. Don't worry about the colour, it's all false. The ocean doesn't really look that colour. But there's the dark blue on the right-hand side is the deeper ocean. This colour in the middle is the continental shelf. It's the area that's ranging about 80 to 100 metres deep. Here we have bumpy bits, that's the coastline near Rockhampton, and so on. And on these continental shelves, not just here, but worldwide, the average rate of sedimentation is 300 millimetres in 1,000 years. Whoopie-doo. 0.3 millimetres in a year. Is my cockroach going to lie there for 200 years waiting to get enough sediment to do something? No, it's not. And so, again, whilst they're averages, the ranges are 150 to 400, that's still not going to have an impact. They said, come close to the shore. Must be sediment there. Well, let's have a look at the mangroves. 3.6 millimetres per year is an annual pattern across thousands of studies worldwide. 3.6 millimetres isn't going to do anything. Still not going to do anything. You need more than 3.6 millimetres because even my little cockroach will now be dug up and eaten because it's only covered in 3 millimetres of sediment, eaten and also exposed to the rainfall and everything else, and will be degraded, corroded, whatever the terms are used in biology and so on. If you've got 10 centimetres of sediment down there, you start to affect the actual breeding and the ability of these mangroves to even live. So in other words, it's not happening here. Here's the problem. The Geological Society of London, the Chemical Society as well, and others make the following statement. Fossils are more likely to be preserved in marine environments, for example, where rapid burial by sediments is possible. Where in a marine environment? And it's not just the period we've been monitoring. We can go back in time, and I've done this, trying to write a paper at the moment, when you look at Paul roaming through what's now Turkey, of course, and you look at where the cities were at that time, how much sedimentation has gone on, guess what? It's just like that. It's nothing. So it's not just the last 100 years. We certainly know it's 2,000 years, if not more. And so, yet this is being taught, and is in textbooks around the world, that the reason we have marine fossils, 99%, is because that's where we have massive sedimentation. Well, that sounds like the ABC to me, that we're being inundated with sediment from everywhere, and this is causing a national catastrophe. Sorry if you love the ABC, but it's not just ABC. I'm very tired of media refusing to give the full picture. And that goes across the board for me. And so then my friend said, well, Ron, maybe it's in the floodplains. So we had a look at the floodplains. Well, I can show you hundreds, if not thousands, of papers that I've collected over the years. Oh, what we do? Again, it got to 3.2 centimetres in Fiji, that middle figure, with a 100-year flood. And it was over an area no bigger than this property. Whoa, don't you get excited. I mean, the point there, 3.2 centimetres, still not enough to create a fossil, over an area as small as this property, and yet we're out there trying to explain how come we have one formation in the USA called the Morrison Formation of sediment, which is 1.5 million square kilometres and 12 kilometres deep. How does this, it just doesn't match, you know what I'm saying? It just doesn't match. And one of the largest areas covered was found by myself in my early years, and I found it down in the Illawarra. And so 10 centimetres. And that worked well, because people went, wow, Ron, you found one of the big ones over a larger area. And, you know, would you like another research grant? Would you like a promotion? Would you like all this sort of stuff? Etc. So I have now travelled the world, officially being able to declare, since no one's been able to beat me, officially being able to declare that the Illawarra is the dirtiest region in the world. You agree with me?
Yes.
Yes. So I had fun with that one. And the dates there, by the way, are funny. If anybody wants to talk about radiometric dating, I actually walked away from radiometric dating. I used carbon-14, potassium argon, thermoluminescence, optically stimulated thermoluminescence, all of them, and walked away. They are the most flawed techniques you'll ever come across. And you can send multiple samples from one layer and you'll get a huge variety of answers back. And which was the one we published? And I stand here recognising what I did wrong. You didn't average it, you didn't take the highest, you took the data, the date that suited your paradigm, that suited the way you think. And that's what you publish as proof. When it's not proof, you selected the data. In fact, one of the top geologic textbooks, written by one of the top geologists, says never ever take a radiometric dating and use it as new evidence. Only use it to support your argument. But that's not what we're taught. We're taught that this is great science. So I walked away from it. What did I use for dating techniques? I've got to be careful of that terminology. I walked into a youth group once and said, I want to talk to you all about dating techniques. Every guy in the room just went, oh, yes! And all the ladies went, oh, no. And then I realised, oh, sorry, I meant radiometric dating techniques. What do I use? In floodplains in particular, I use cigarette butts. Because the government changed the cigarette butts from being non-decomposable, or whatever you call it, to those that rot away rather quickly. So I go down a profile, I know which year that was, it was in the 60s or something. I go down, no butt, no butt, no butt, no, oh, there's a butt, okay. That's the last butt, that's probably in the 60s. The other one I use, will surprise you, is Coca-Cola bottles. Coca-Cola have changed their bottles over all the years and have dated them. They've got a museum, so we can actually use those bottles as a rough indicator, which I found more accurate than the radiometric carbon-14 dating and so on we were doing. So, yeah, it's still not enough. It's still not enough. So in the end, my friends said, Ron, what about the tsunamis? Catastrophic events. Well, guess what? After the big tsunami hit Indonesia, the biggest we've ever recorded, after the first aid went in, guess who went in? Not me, but colleagues like me went in to measure the amount of sediment. Guess what we found? Woohoo! 10 centimetres. It ranged between 6 and 12. That doesn't seem right, does it? It doesn't seem right. But we were forgetting, what is a tsunami? A tsunami is not a physical wave until the very end. When something occurs over here, some sort of shifting of the Earth's surface, it creates an energy wave. It's energy that's transferred, not a wave. It's not a physical wave. Why do you think boats go out into the ocean when a tsunami's coming? Because there is no giant wave. It's energy coming into shore, and then as the shore shallows, it slows down the actual energy transfer and creates a physical wave and then crashes. And so over there we can see houses wiped out, people wiped out, but down here, that's grass with a thin layer of sediment on it. The biggest sedimentary layers are here. Up to 12 centimetres was the maximum recorded. And it sort of hit me, whoa, even the world's biggest tsunamis are not creating enough sediment to create a fossil. And I got to see a tsunami, by the way, in the Cook Islands. I thought the Cook Islands were a bit weird. I got a phone call from the New Zealand Embassy. Ron, there's a tsunami coming. Why don't you rush on down to the port and have a look at it? And I thought, you people are crazy, but I was told everyone else is going down. So if I go down and die with the rest of them. So I went down to the port, and in it came. And it was about that big. Came across the port, all the Cook Islanders cheering, woo, tsunami, as it went across. And then it hit me. Come on, Ron, you're an earth scientist. The energy wave came in, but there is no shallowing of the Cook Islanders shoreline. It's a coral atoll. So it comes straight up out of the deep ocean. So the energy wave hits the wall and bounces back. Cook Islands and those islands have never had a tsunami. It's only that very, very narrow section did that little tsunami get formed. So the point is, I'm proud that I have seen a tsunami. Big one, that big. But no, it's interesting. You've got to understand all this to realise, from a sediment transport point of view, it's having minimal effect. So let's go a little bit deeper. University of Queensland did a study trying to test whether baby crocodiles, which were dead, could be buried and create a fossil. And this was one of my first papers in Creation Ministries. They buried it under 20 centimetres of sediment, 20. And guess what it did? It bloated and broke out of the sediment. 20 centimetres was not good enough for even an infant crocodile, let alone a T-Rex. So that's not, I wrote a paper on that, and CMI was like, no, Ron, you're a Christian now, don't do, I want a cartoon. I want a cartoon where the PhD student was trying to stand on the crocodile and hold it down underneath the sediment and said, Ron, no, you're a Christian now, you mustn't do that. And so I thought, well, good humour, but I got rejected for that, but the article was published anyway. And that's in that magazine there, which I'm going to strongly recommend at the end. Here's another paper I wrote on, Fossils in a Day. Scientists were looking at squeezing lizard parts between two concrete rocks. Did it for over 20 years. But every time they opened it up 24 hours later, all they found, they put incredible pressure, temperature, I won't go into the experiment, all they found was mush. Liquid mush. They realised then that we as earth scientists have been saying fossils are found in flood sediments. So they decided in the end to wrap up the lizard legs, put them into a flood sediment and then squeeze them. 24 hours later, when they opened them up, they were stunned. They had simulated fossil development. How did that happen? Well, what are you made of mainly?
Water.
Water. Water inhibits fossilization. Water has to be removed from you within weeks, if not months, the most. If it's not removed, you will decompose. You will not fossilize. In other words, that proved to us that the amount of sediment needed, the pressure and then the temperature rises, is massive to get the liquid out of your body. And what did the sediment do? It absorbed the liquid and allowed the whole thing to occur. So it sort of really fits together beautifully there. But again, there's a good friend of mine, Monaro, in Japan. He's paying one university, trying an engineering department, which really interests you, trying to work out what is the pressure in terms of how do you transfer pressure into depth of sediment. But they're already saying it is massive depths of sediment to create the pressure to do all that. I published that in the magazine. Did I mention that before? Magazine? Yes, I have. It's a great thing. So it's in there, an article written for you. Again, I had to learn how to write for the public. And then, of course, the last piece of information in terms of fossils is Mary Schweitzer did a discovery which she cut it was a T-Rex bone, cut it in half and found red blood cells, tissues over there which can be stretched and put back in a position. The world went chaotic and said that's impossible. Dinosaurs died 65 million years ago and became fossilised 65 million years ago. But the question then becomes, well, how do you have tissues, red blood cells, still surviving? 65 million years. Do you think your blood cells are going to survive 65 million years? No. You all would? Excellent, excellent. Well, that's because you have to be raised again and live on, yes, more than 65 million years, actually. And so the point there is they challenged her. Even the Royal Society in London said we're going to be sacrilegious and cut the dinosaur bone in half. We've never done this. We don't want to do this. They did it and they were stunned. They said she had contaminated the sample. No, they found their sample had the same red cells, tissues. We're finding much more now. Now, the medical professions worldwide say the best you could do in a laboratory, storing this under the most intense, beautiful conditions, is 10,000 years, not 65 million. So the world was in a state of shock. We have found that now in so many species, not just dinosaur species, animal species, red blood cells, tissues, eyes, all things intact. It's incredible, which is not possible over 65 million years. We know that. So is any money being spent on understanding, are they younger in age? No, but millions is being spent on how do red blood cells survive 65 million years? Because the paradigm will not be challenged. We have to apparently live on evolution and so on. So that's a great one, that appeared in the journal as well. And so I came to the conclusion now, as a scientist, not as a Christian, sediment supply rate needed to create fossils is not sufficient today, and fossils were not formed millions of years ago. When you look at them also the landscapes, they indicate massive sedimentation in rapid sequences, not allowing bioturbation, not allowing polystrate fossils, not allowing anything. Just rapid. Not even a chance to rain between it, just because it was all done on the ocean floor. I came to the conclusion that a global flood did occur. I raised it up with my friends who I travel the world with, and they said, Ron, we agree. And we're all secular, would you believe? We agree. The evidence overwhelmingly points to a global flood on this planet. But they said, Ron, don't say it aloud. You'll lose your job, you'll lose your grant money, and so on. Well, I did say it aloud. Lost my job, grant money, everything. They still work out there, but they all, isn't it interesting? Secular scientists were clinging to a paradigm that they know is not correct because they'll lose their jobs. That's fascinating. So many scientists have been terminated and not allowed to publish anymore in journals. We're banned from doing all that. And so I'm now challenged because in my time in the Cook Islands and other places, in Finland and elsewhere, I've heard messages like this. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. What do I do about this? So I'm sort of now going, well, I'm not atheist, I'm more agnostic. I know God exists, but I want nothing to do with him, basically. But this is what happened. I'm now going, at all points, I measured rates, distributions, volume, frequency of sediments, look at abundance, sorting, role of sediments in all of these fossils. And I go, I've only got one conclusion. The Bible is right. But how do I handle that? I was now research director of a major research institution that covered the whole university. I had 40 scientists working for me. I was professor. I was, as I said, advisor to the federal government and all the rest. And I remember they sitting there one day with the team, and I said just one day over coffee, I think God exists. In a university setting. Do you get into trouble for saying that in a university setting? Oh, you do. Unbelievable. I started getting notes on my door, handwritten notes, by academics, absolutely ridiculing me for having made this statement public that I think God exists. The silly academics didn't realise I was dean and professor. I knew their handwriting. I knew who was doing it. But they were doing this. And one was a biologist, a researcher, and she was awfully worried about me because she'd never met a tutor who was a Christian in university, a lecturer, a senior lecturer, but here's a director and a dean, all the rest, saying God exists. She misinterpreted that statement. She thought I was a Christian. Because if I said, I think God exists, she went, oh, he's a Christian, and I've never met one before. He needs to be rescued, saved from this strange thinking. So she began a program. She was a hardcore atheist. She began a program challenging me. And I didn't know the answers. So what did I say to her? I didn't as an academic admit that I didn't know. You don't do that as an academic. Your standard line is, look, I haven't got time for this. Go and read the book. And of course the book, I mean the Bible. And guess what atheists do? They read the book. So she read the book. And she came back with more difficult questions. Why did God hurt so many people? I said, what are you talking about? She said, what are you reading? She said, I read the book of Genesis. And I said, I don't think you're supposed to start there. I think you're supposed to read them in things they call the Gospels. She walked away thinking I was the craziest guy ever. She said, why would you read the Bible backwards? Why wouldn't you start at the beginning? So she read the book of Exodus and moved on through the rest of Moses' writings and so on. And in the end, she came to me and said, look, I want to go to a church. I want to prove that God doesn't exist, basically. I want to help you. I think, what? This is strange. And so she walks this way, I walk that way. But the point is, we're in the same institution, the same research centre. I couldn't avoid it. And he said, fine, pick you up. We'll go to a church. Well, we went to a big church. And she walked in and said, this is not a church. I said, what? She said, where's the stained glass windows? Because she'd never been to a church. She'd only ever seen it on television. I said, I don't know. Sit down. We're in the middle of the church. We're having this academic argument. She said, no, where's the organ? What's with this rock band on the stage? I said, I don't know. Just sit down. She said, where's the wooden pews? What's with these lovely cushiony seats? I said, I don't know. Just sit down, will you? So here we are, two academics, having this argument in the middle of the church, and the pastors are looking at us going, strange couple, I need a lot of help. Anyhow, we weren't a couple, but the point was, it was just interesting. They saw the two of us there. And so we listened to the message. She didn't understand a word. I still didn't understand most of it. Later she admitted, who's Hosanna? Who was that? And why do I keep talking about a lamb? What's with the lamb? And so she's asking all these questions. But the point is, the pastors decided to do a call for Christ. And so at the end of the service, they said, lower your heads, close your eyes, and raise your hand. They said more than that. But guess what she did? Because she's an atheist. She raised a hand and gave her life to Christ. And then she decided to open up one eye because she thought, what if I'm the only person? But also, what will Ron think standing next to me will be happy now that I've become a Christian. And she looked across, and guess what she saw? My hand was raised as well. And she again thought, you are one strange character. You're already a Christian from my perspective. Here's the important point, ladies and gentlemen. If an atheist can drag an agnostic into church and both become Christians, what are we doing? How are we helping the Lord? If he has to go to those measures to get an atheist and agnostic to come to Christ, we really need to be looking at how we evangelise and do more of this. Did she annoy me anymore after that? No. About a year and a half later, I married her. And it's just been, well, it hasn't been announced yet, but she went on to become absolutely loving ministry. She went down to the Lachlan Macquarie Institute training in Canberra, offered a Liberal seat, all the rest she turned it down, said you people don't know how to handle women in politics yet, and wanted to do ministry, and as of last week she was just accepted. She will now become a speaker in Ministries International. She'll be speaking mainly to women's groups because she loves talking about women's identity to young ladies. She'll be talking to youth groups as well, schools, and those sorts of events. And so the good thing here is we now get to travel together rather than being separated all the time, and we love all that. That's how I became a Christian. It was the science that put me in a position where I became open to listening to a pastor for the first time in my life. And just to wrap it up then, for those of us who are challenged at times, as I was, beautiful piece of scripture here, Proverbs. I just want you to focus on just parts of these messages. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Do not lean on your own understanding, which comes out of our society now. Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world. It has broader meaning than what I'm referring to, but the point is we must keep being aware. We need to be transformed by the renewal of your mind and so on. And I love here, and this is said so many times in the Bible, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men. And that's the journey I had to go through. To stop listening to my colleagues and my training and look at what the Lord was showing me for 35 years, that the flood has occurred. And there's no doubt about that has now occurred. It's been published for the first time in international literature that a global flood did occur. But they're not allowed to say it happened 4,500 years ago. They said it happened millions of years ago. Why did they actually publish that? Because the evidence is overwhelming. You can no longer deny that this planet was affected by a global flood. And so how do you help yourself grow in that? Well, and how do you help others? Well, the magazine is our number one thing, sold in over 100 different countries, translated in 30 or 40 different languages. It is the number one Creation magazine. It deals with theology, science, youth sections, biographies, all the rest of the great Christians and so on. And if you get a 1-year subscription, you get 4 issues in a year, and you get a free back issue as well. I've got them over there. I recommend, though, that you move towards a 2-year subscription, because now CMI have gotten very generous, and I'm not part of that decision making, but I do love what they do. 2-year, you'll get it at a cheaper price per year, which is great. And I think the figures there are only, you guys got those forms? Yeah. Just pass around so people can see the actual figures on there. I think, just to be sure, I think it's only $36 for one or something. Yeah, and then $68 for 2 years. But not only will you get that, you will get the free back issue. You will get streaming video and study guides as well, free. You will also get access to our journal, which is incredible. You'll get a 1-year access free of charge. That is amazing. That takes it to a whole nother level of theology, understanding, and so on. And we have little booklets up there on the table, each worth $5. We're giving away 4 of them, all wrapped up over there for free as part of a 2-year subscription. So you get a reduced price. And so you get this book there, it's Human Life Special, the Creation Survival Guide about Christian schools, 15 Reasons, Genesis' history, and Stones and Bones, etc. So all of that comes with a 2-year subscription. So that's just incredible. And I can show you, that's the form that's going around. If you do want to sign up and bring it over to me, and we'll do the transaction here and then, and you'll get those free issues and that. You don't get them online, by the way. It's only here tonight. So in the end, you'll just pay $68 and that'll be the end of it if you do it online. I could show you so many examples of how people have been transformed with that magazine. My wife, family, totally atheistic. I gave my father-in-law one of these magazines. He wouldn't speak to me for 6 months. But later, when he injured himself, threatened with amputation, he asked me to pray and asked Julie to pray. We did, and he couldn't believe it. What happened is he said, "Remember that magazine you got me? Can you renew that subscription, please?" So we did, and they've given their lives to Christ. Julie's sister, husband, 2 boys gave their lives to Christ as well. And my family, same sort of thing has happened. Brother, alcoholic, stopped drinking. He was unemployed for most of his life, chronic alcoholic. Now is a manager of a cleaning company, doing all this sort of stuff. These things are happening across our families. Why? Because we became Christians and they're looking at us. But 2, we made sure that magazine was fully available to them. Even leaving it on the kitchen or the bench table in the lounge room, that's what we've done. And we've given away so many copies. So what I suggest you do is if you use this as an evangelical tool. In other words, you buy it, then what do? Before you pass it on,
read it.
Read it. Read it, and then what are you going to do? Pass it on. And so that I do strongly recommend. And I've been, one of the best places to pass it on is a doctor's surgery. Because people in doctor's surgeries are a little bit worried. And if they find that in their reading, we've had so many testimonies of people who've given their life, not because a Christian came to them, but because they got the magazine. So don't be afraid. If you are afraid of it in your workplace, do what I did on day 1. When there's no one around lunchtime, run in, throw the magazine on the table and run out. Now I don't worry about it. But you use whatever techniques you've got. Get that magazine into other people's hands so you don't collect it, you don't keep reading it and storing it and binding it and all this. You use it as a tool to connect with others. And so, 2 last slides. The Creation Answers book is our #1 bestseller around the world. Over 60 questions are raised in that book that you may get asked as a Christian, but you don't know how to answer them. These are difficult questions we get asked about the book of Genesis. So, I'll target you, Pastor, first. What if somebody comes up to you, as I'm sure they have? Are you a Christian?
Yes.
Yes. Don't answer the next question. Great, I've been wondering, who did Cain marry? Most of us go, Or someone might come up, are you a Christian?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Look, if God created everything, who created God? Don't answer. We give you the answers. We have researched this, asked hundreds of people, if not more, what are the questions you get asked? That is so valuable. And if you don't know the answer, guess what you're going to do? You'll already have the red book on your shelf at home. What are you going to do to the person that asks you that question? Oh, I haven't got time now, I'm pretty busy. Look, let's catch up tomorrow over coffee. Run home, pull the red book off the shelf, read that chapter and go back tomorrow. It'll be really cool. You got the answer, okay? That is an incredible book. Really good book. And the last one is beautiful hard copy book there. We took the best articles over 40 years of that magazine, we digitised them, rewrote them, brought them up to speed, published it as the most beautiful coffee table book. If you're looking for Christmas presents, that is an amazing book to buy. There's so much more there as well, I won't go into that, but the point is, our goal is to link and feed. That's what CMI does. I'm here to link with you and to feed you with resources. Because we have a deeper goal. I link and feed with you. What am I hoping? That you will link and feed others using the resources we have here. I link and feed with my message and the resources. There's only a dozen of us roaming the country. We hope, pray that you will link and feed with others. Just simply give them the Creation magazine. Something is that simple.
That'll fill up their stomachs.
Sorry?
That'll fill up their stomachs.
That'll fill up their stomachs, yes. So I'll leave it on that point. Thank you very much for paying attention. I'm happy for Q&A. Yeah, that clock has stayed at
Yeah, forget about that one.
I never had all time.
No batteries. 10 past 8.
10 past 8. Do you want to have a couple of questions first up? And then
Yeah,
I'm happy to...
I think that would be great.
Yep.
If you're happy to take
Happy
questions.
There's one down the back.
When the researchers said that a flood could have happened millions of years ago, what was their reasoning behind why that would have happened?
Because the physical evidence I've shown you in the seminar...
What caused the flood that long ago instead of being the flood?
Oh, because you are not permitted to say it happened 4,500 years ago. If you look at journals and the scientific paradigm, they actually state you are not permitted to infer or invoke anything religious. So if you said that there's a global flood, the evidence is overwhelming, that's one statement. But if you say it occurred 4,500 years ago, oh, now you've crossed the line, because you've actually endorsed the Bible. You must not do that. My wife has had a paper rejected because she did not, it was an ecological paper, not an evolutionary paper. They said it doesn't matter. It doesn't say that this proves evolution. She said, well, of course it doesn't prove evolution, it's an ecological paper. I said, sorry, read the journal fine print. Every paper must say it proves evolution. They're riddled with it. And so we are constrained in our publishing. That's why we have gone as, you know, and I thought I was pretty good when I joined CMI. Boy, I have met the world's top scientists, unbelievable scientists, who've been awarded uranium medals, everything, for their outstanding contribution. And they're all Christians, and they are creationists, as we call them. They believe in the book. So the point there is, they have to say 1,000,000 years, because they're not allowed to say 4.5.
Right,
Not permissible.
So you're just saying dictated you cannot.
The journals do to start with. I am not allowed to publish any of my research,
Who's the journals?
the academic journals. So I publish in top academic journals around the world. They will not accept my publications anymore because I've become a Christian. I'm also noted online as being writing for Creation Ministries. We are automatically banned from publishing in other literature. Even though I made a major discovery, this is fascinating, I'm a researcher at heart. So I noticed something in the Finke River in Australia, went out there about a water gap cutting through the ranges, James's Range and so on, but I noticed something else. It seemed to be a second water gap. And I became the first person ever to find 2 water gaps doing this 10 times. Impossible. Absolutely impossible under current conditions or even wet, dramatic climates. Can't be done. But I can't publish that. I cannot publish that. So I publish it here. That's how bad it gets, because the journals make it quite clear. And they actually stipulate religious matters must never enter science. We're looking at it objectively. Which I didn't have a problem with in one sense, but they're not allowing any other expression other than their interpretation. Question?
Yeah, when you were a microbiologist, did you find evidence contrary to the evolutionary narrative there as well?
No, my focus there was really more about community, because the surrounding rural community was very much based on septic systems. And you'll love this one. So we developed a model looking at hundreds of parameters of microbes and bacteria and all sorts of things, put it into a statistical model to see if we could find out which septics were leaking in which properties and contaminating the rivers. Well, I had a PhD student working with me, and he came up with an even better model. He found that every family with their gut, flora and fauna has a unique signature. And I said, that's interesting. And he says it is, because certain families have the same signature. I said, what are you saying? And he said, I can't say it loud. He said, there's a certain relationship between those 2 families. And therefore, because what happens then is they actually transfer, and they had the same. And I said, we could become detectives. We could make a fortune out of this, mate. This is before I became a Christian. I said, we could become detectives and say, if you're worried about your husband or wife, we'll test all the local toilets and find out the one that's responsible. So, and we published, 6 international papers, got in the media and everything else. But no, it was not about evolution. It was actually about identifying human waste products and then trying to understand how that impacts on river systems. Other questions? I am more than happy to continue answer questions. Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
And you said there was no piranha in the river. Why in one river and not in the other?
No, there are piranha in both.
They're different species.
It's a different, there's a subtle difference in the species. So the piranha, they're still piranha. They'll have a second, slightly different name or something like that. So the piranha in the Amazon do not eat people. When you go to the Amazon, places like Iquitos and those things, they've got surf life saving flags up. And it's really interesting. I was stunned by that. You can actually swim in the Amazon, the Hualaca, and the piranhas are there. They're not the problem. It's your pythons that are the problem. They're incredible. They'll just wrap up you.
Where did you grow up as well?
Where did I?
Where did you grow up? Where were you born?
Well, where was I born? I was actually born in Wollongong, the dirtiest place on the planet. But I spent most of my life overseas. They're both piranhas. It's the Congo ones that was Jacques Cousteau. Unfortunate. Jacques Cousteau did a documentary, and this is where you get a lot of science manipulated. What he did was needed more money, and he thought the piranha would be a good one. And he found an oxbow lake or a cut-off lake, whatever you want to call it, an abandoned lake from a river, from the Amazon River. And in that were piranhas by the truckload. And so he thought he'd send cattle in. And those of you my age might remember a documentary where he sent cattle in. But the point is, the piranhas wouldn't touch the cattle, even though they were starving. So what he had to do was to cut the cattle so they could get access to the soft tissue. Then they ravaged the animals, and he filmed that and says piranhas eat everything to get more money to continue his documentaries. So in Europe, he is not considered with any reputation at all. A false teacher raising money to prove his line to do more of his own science. So Jacques Cousteau was not on my popularity list at all. So, Yeah, but you will see them, and they are offered on the dish in the restaurants. Yeah, so, yes. Other questions? Yeah, one more, and then one more here.
This might be a bit dumb, but can evolution absolutely not stand with there being a global flood in the picture?
Interesting point. You need my wife to answer that. She's a biologist. We've got truckloads on our website, more than this physical stuff. What you've got there, unfortunately, is we don't reject natural selection. Natural selection is something that happens. Natural selection, though, diminishes the amount of information within you. It does not increase the amount of information. Right? If you're familiar with that from your training. But it is used as an argument for evolution. But evolution requires an increased information. Natural selection is a decrease in information. So that's a complete falsity, particularly in Queensland, where it is legislated that you must teach natural selection proves evolution. The two are entirely different concepts, but we have to teach our children that it's proof of evolution. Evolution is based on mutations and things like that. The problem now is that the amount of research done on that highlights the incredible failure rate, which is now embedded in you and I, because we've now been able to map human genetics for a number of generations. And we are not a species that's evolving, we're devolving. Our sicknesses, our vulnerability are that. It's even being published in top journals like Nature and Science. We're a species that'll be gone within 30,000 years because we are degenerating. But that fits with the biblical account. The moment we were removed from the Garden of Eden, we're no longer protected, so we begin to degenerate. And so because the mutation rate is shockingly against us, not for us. The other thing is, of course, you look at Darwin's arguments. The one thing I do admire about Darwin is he came up with 5 parameters in the end. He said, if it doesn't work, don't accept my argument of evolution. One of them is transitional fossils. We don't have them. Whenever one is raised, it is knocked down very quickly. So we lack that. And there's another 4, I haven't going to know. But the point is, Darwin had at least the common sense to say, that's right, the cell has to be the simplest structure possible, or evolution doesn't occur. Well, the cell is more complex than anything else you'd imagine, more complex than a city. And so all these assumptions have been proven incorrect, but we will not reject the argument. I'll give him credit that he thought like a scientist. There could be problems with this. Let's check it. We've checked it, and it doesn't support him at all. I can't give you a detailed answer. My wife can certainly give you one because they found the E factor. There's another factor which I couldn't even tell you the name of, but us guys, for example, all have a similar genetic 1 type because we all came from one male and it wasn't Adam. Where did we have a bottleneck, a block in our genetic? The flood, Noah. His 3 sons had the same. Ladies, you fall into 3 categories. Because there, in terms of that, whatever it is, you have to talk to my wife or go online. The 3 categories are because there was 3 independent women. The assumption, of course, is Noah's wife had no more children. And those 3 women carried different genetics. So it's really fascinating. They've mapped all that way through and gone backwards in time. So there's been a lot of research done on all this, that the men and the women, the difference between us in terms of our genetics comes back to the flood, but then you can trace it back even further to the Eve factor as well. And then when you do your mathematics and all that, it sort of basically fits, roughly, a biblical story. But now, go online, creation.com, truckloads of articles on that. I tend to avoid it because it's biological. You know, I'm not a green person, I'm a brown person. I love dirt. So I can't really answer that question. So, you had a question?
My question was about soft tissue of fossils. You said 62 million would not survive, but 10,000 would survive. I'm having problems for me with a 10,000, 62,000. The soft tissue survival, if it can survive 10,000, why wouldn't it survive 62,000? I'm having trouble, or 62 million. I'm having problem it's surviving even 10,000 years. What happens to the tissue? Why is not degrading? And because if we assume that creation about between 6 to 10,000 years. Therefore, it did not degrade, so we cannot speculate beyond that. But how is it? It is not degrading over 10,000.
Good question. Again, have a look at those articles that I've put up there and have a look on the website. They are degrading. They're not in perfect condition. So they have degraded over that period of time, which I'm coming at you from a CMI point of view. I would argue that's 4,500 years, and they have degraded. In other words, they're no longer perfectly functional. Red blood cells have degraded. What we've been told from the medical profession when they examined it is that the best we could do in the best storage facilities is 10,000. But even during that 10,000 years, it will degrade. So, it's not perfect. The point is they're still there. That's the point. There's no medic on the planet will tell you 65 million years it could last that long. So we have to reject the 65 million. What we don't know is how long they can last for. So I'll agree with you on that point. We don't know. We know they're degenerating, but what is the rate? Well, that's going to be hard to calculate, but we definitely know it's not 65 million.
I have a follow-up question to the previous one. When you said evolution is essentially degeneration, so the natural selection or random mutation, all sorts of things. I look from the biblical perspective. We are not going to degenerate because of the naturalness. We are degenerating because of our sin. And the end of humanity is not going to be because we evolved and now we reached it. It's like a bell curve. Now we reached the pinnacle and now we degenerate. I say, so I kind of not buying that the biological degeneration and in 30,000 years we will stop existing, cease to exist. We degenerate because of our sin and rejecting, and we are in fact, according to the Bible, perfected by the Holy Spirit, and we will enter the next phase of our life in eternity in more perfect condition than we.
Absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with you either. It is the sin that separated us from him, and from that then we begin our process. We can measure it though in medical and physical terms. We can actually see degeneration going on in our genetics. They are falling apart. So that's not to say it's an evolution or a development. It's actually separation from God. And then we see that also then, of course, in if we look at it another way, in the relationship in marriage, in terms of who can you marry. That's changed over time because we have degenerated, and you get more mutations with a closer relationship. So you'll notice 3 times, I think it is in the Bible, 3 different stories where we must separate ourselves further and so on. But yes, that's why I said from the beginning was when we were actually, when we had to leave the Garden of Eden. We began that process. Now, 30,000 years is a calculation by academics. That's all it is. And all I'm trying to do is highlight is that, you know, we're not getting better. The rate of illness is increasing, has throughout history, and that's why I think it's quite naive of us to think of our ancestors as dumb and ignorant. The greatest minds existed in the past, and we're struggling more today than we ever have. So, no, I agree with you on that point. Yep. Any other questions, or shall we have tea and coffee? Let's have tea and coffee.
I'll ask later.
Yeah, I think John's looking at you rather firmly. Okay, well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to come over here and answer questions, and certainly recommend if you've got somebody you want to give something to, whether young or old, in certain situations, please ask a question or recommend something for you. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for telling us your story, and I highly recommend the Creation magazine, which I've been getting since I was a child and still get it. It's excellent.
Okay.